The Department of War gave Anthropic an ultimatum: remove all guardrails from their models to be able to be used by the Department of War or get blacklisted. And Dario and Anthropic said no. And this is a mounting battle as the entire AI industry is picking sides. Let me break this all down for you. All right, so here's what's going on right now. The Pentagon, specifically the Department of War, has said to Anthropic that they have to remove all guardrails from their models so that it can be used for defensive purposes. And for those of you thinking that Anthropic would never use their models for anything war related, you would be wrong. They already have a contract with the Department of Defense. In fact, I believe every major AI lab has a contract with the Department of Defense. Look at this. Anthropic signed a $200 million contract with the DoD in July and was actually the first AI lab to integrate its models into mission workflows on classified networks. But the Pentagon wants Anthropic to remove those guardrails. Specifically, Pentagon demands lawful AI use without constraints threatens Anthropic's business. And this is actually a very real threat to Anthropic's business. And so there are two major issues in which Anthropic has said that's the line in the sand. One is using AI, specifically the Claude family of models, for mass surveillance against the American people. And two, using AI to develop fully autonomous weapons with no human in the loop. Both of those things are absolute red lines for Anthropic. But of course, the Pentagon said the Department of War has no interest in using AI to conduct mass surveillance of Americans, which is illegal. Nor do we want to use AI to develop autonomous weapons that operate without human involvement. So they're saying, of course, we're never going to do that. Give us the capabilities to do it, but we would never do that. And the Department of Defense, and specifically Pete Hegseth, has threatened Anthropic in response in multiple ways. Look at this. So he's threatened to categorize Anthropic as a supply chain risk, and that would be massive because that designation has never been used for an American company. It has only been used for foreign adversaries, and it would prohibit other vendors that do business with the US military from using Anthropic's products. He also threatened to cancel their $200 million contract, which, to be honest, is probably just a drop in the bucket for Anthropic at this point. According to Axios, he also threatened to invoke the Defense Production Act to compel Anthropic to provide its model without any restriction. And if you're wondering what the DPA is, here it is. The Defense Production Act, passed in 1950 during the Korean War, gives the US president authority to direct private industry in the interest of national defense. Basically, if we're on the brink of war or at war, the president can tell private companies to help with production of whatever assets are needed during that war. All right, so let's take a step back. How did we even get here? Well, first, as I mentioned, in July, Anthropic was one of 4 AI companies, OpenAI, DeepMind, and xAI were the others, to get contracts worth up to $200 million to prototype frontier AI capabilities that advance US national security. And then it was reported by the Wall Street Journal that in January, the Pentagon used Anthropic's Claude in Maduro, Venezuela raid. And it specifically says use of the model came through a contract with Palantir. So very interesting. So the mission to capture Maduro and his wife, including bombing several sites in Caracas last month. Anthropic's usage guidelines prohibit Claude from being used to facilitate violence, develop weapons, or conduct surveillance. And since then, Anthropic and the Department of Defense have been in negotiations for months, and now leading us to where we are currently. Anthropic and the Department of Defense have been in negotiations for months, trying to figure out how to move forward because Anthropic maintains that they should have guardrails around their models for those two use cases that I mentioned: fully autonomous weapons and mass surveillance of US citizens. And the Department of Defense says, no, please remove it. And that brings us to Dario's letter. So he basically outlines his argument as to why they should not remove those two use cases. Listen to this. I believe deeply in the existential importance of using AI to defend the United States and other democracies and to defeat our autocratic adversaries. So right away, he's saying, yes, our models can and should be used by the US military to ensure US and ally safety. We've therefore worked proactively to deploy our models to the Department of War and the intelligence community. We were among the first. We already talked about that. He also goes on to detail that they cut off access to firms linked to the Chinese Communist Party, even at the expense of their own revenue, shut down CCP-sponsored cyber attacks, and has advocated for strong export controls on chips. However, in a narrow set of cases, we believe AI can undermine rather than defend democratic values. Some uses are also simply outside the bounds of what today's technology can safely and reliably do. That's very important. It's not just that he doesn't think these guardrails should be removed. It's that if they were removed, the models cannot confidently do the things that the Department of Defense may want them to do. So the two things, mass domestic surveillance, as we talked about, and fully autonomous weapons. Now, specifically for the fully autonomous weapons, frontier AI systems are simply not reliable enough to power fully autonomous weapons. We will not knowingly provide a product that puts America's warfighters and civilians at risk. Yes, AI models hallucinate, and one simple mistake could cost lives. So this argument actually makes a ton of sense. And in addition, without proper oversight, fully autonomous weapons cannot be relied upon to exercise the critical judgment that our highly trained professional troops exhibit every day. And he finishes with, our strong preference is to continue to serve the department and our warfighters with our two requested safeguards in place. Note the M dash right there, and there too. So I wonder if he used Claude to write this. Should the department choose to offboard Anthropic, we will work to enable a smooth transition to another provider, avoiding any disruption to ongoing military planning operations or other critical missions. So he's saying, yes, you can use us. Just carve out those two use cases. And if you decide you don't want to use us, it's all good. And we won't just cut off access. We will make sure there is a smooth transition and replacement with another company's model that might not have these same guardrails in place. And there's a lot of interesting pieces here and a lot of contradicting arguments out of the Department of Defense. One, they're saying, of course we wouldn't use it for mass surveillance, and of course we wouldn't use it for fully autonomous weapons. But at the same time, we should be able to just remove all the guardrails. So it's very contradictory. You're not going to do that, but also the thing that definitely prevents you from doing that, you're asking to have removed. And the other is they're trying to force Anthropic to work with the government at the same time as the lever to force them is to label them as a security risk. So they're both a security risk and essential to the government, which obviously is very contradictory. Let me try to steelman some of the Pentagon's arguments. Specifically, they said, you have to trust your military to do the right thing. Well, I can't even do that. Okay, remove this part. And so some of the arguments back from the Department of Defense, whether you think they're strong or not, is you have to just trust your military to do the right thing. Okay. And they have also made some very good concessions in order to make the deal. But Anthropic said the concessions were inadequate, and the chief technology officer of the Pentagon called Dario a liar. And the Department of Defense did offer to put in writing that we're specifically acknowledging federal laws that restrict the military from surveilling Americans. He also said the military offered language specifically acknowledging these policies that have been in place for years at the Pentagon regarding autonomous weapons. And when asked why they specifically won't carve out those two use cases, mass surveillance or autonomous weapons, he said, it's already illegal. Why would we have to also restate that? And of course, not to be left out of the conversation, other AI companies have jumped in. Of course, Sam Altman has to lend his opinion. He is the CEO of one of, if not the most important AI company on the planet. Altman says OpenAI is working on the Pentagon deal amid Anthropic standoff. He sent a memo to his company saying they are still working with the Department of Defense to see if its models could be used in classified settings in a way that kept the same safety guardrails that has brought its rival Anthropic into a stalemate with the government. So in short, he is agreeing with Anthropic. He's agreeing with Dario and actually said so on a news program today. I don't want to play the clip. I don't want my video to get claimed, but basically he said, as much difference as I have with the Anthropic team, I actually trust them to do the right thing, and I trust that they are making the best decision for the American people. We have long believed that AI should not be used for mass surveillance or autonomous lethal weapons, and that humans should remain in the loop for high-stakes automated decisions. These are our main red lines. And I agree, humans need to be in the loop for things that are this critical. I mean, Even for just ingesting my email, I need to be in the loop. So prompt injections happen, and essentially they're guaranteed to happen. So yes, humans need to be in the loop. We believe this dispute isn't about how AI will be used, but about control. We believe that a private US company cannot be more powerful than the democratically elected US government, although companies can have lots of input and influence. Democracy is messy, but we are committed to it. And so they are essentially saying, yes, we're going to put those guardrails in place as well. Then 200 engineers from top AI companies have signed a letter essentially agreeing with Anthropic. So the letter, short and sweet, we hope our leaders will put aside their differences and stand together to continue to refuse the Department of War's current demands for permission to use our model for domestic mass surveillance and autonomously killing people without human oversight. Obviously, that's not what they're saying they want to do, just to be clear. But they are saying remove all guardrails. And of course, just before we were about to hit publish, Trump dropped a scathing post against Anthropic, and it's kind of nuts. Let's read it. The United States of America will never allow a radical left woke company to dictate how our great military fights and wins wars. Therefore, I am directing every federal agency in the United States government to immediately cease all use of Anthropic's technology. We don't need it, we don't want it, and will not do business with them again. It sure sounds like David Sachs may have had a little bit to do with this. He has a long history of criticizing Anthropic. So that is just another escalation in this battle. Okay, we have another update right before publishing. Something else happened. Pete Hegseth gave a massive update. Listen to this. Anthropic delivered a masterclass in arrogance and betrayal, as well as a textbook case of how not to do business with the United States. The point of all of it, in conjunction with the president's directive for the federal government to cease all use of Anthropic's technology, I am directing the Department of War to designate Anthropic as a supply chain risk to national security. Whoa, effective immediately. No contractor, supplier, or partner that does business with the United States military may conduct any commercial activity with Anthropic. Whoa, big news. And this is the first time a US company has ever been designated a supply chain risk. This is massive and an increasing escalation in the battle between the US government and Anthropic. So a lot going on here. And this is a developing story. I just wanted to catch you up, and I actually want to know your thoughts. Let me know down below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.